Hello again. We're back, and it's my pleasure to welcome Royee to our virtual stage. Hi, Royee.
Hello, Dan. How
How
are you?
many? What Codecamp is this for you? I think I lost track of how many of our conferences you
Yeah, me
attended.
too. Me too, and I'm glad about it because it's been a few years that I'm part of the Codecamp family, and I'm really proud of it because this is an awesome opportunity for all of us to share knowledge. To meet people. I've met you guys. This is wonderful. So thanks.
Yeah, I remember. I think our first talk was in Codecamp Timișoara years ago. We
Yeah.
discussed about
Yes,
micro frontends.
that's right. That
So,
was an
what do you
awesome.
have in
Yes.
store for us today?
So now what I'm going to talk about is actually one of the things that I'm really curious about in the past few years. Once we moved from client developers to full stack developers as front-end, as someone who is doing JavaScript. So I want to bind all of the parts together, all of the key parts together and build some sort of an awesome full stack solution involving a couple of the great things out there like Yarn-workspaces, TypeScript, and mono-repos.
Sounds very interesting. I suggest let's get the show on the road, and then we can talk about it more at the end of our session.
Great. Okay, so sharing my screen. There it is.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So is everything all right? We can see it.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So hello everyone. Thanks a lot for joining. I'm really excited to be part of this virtually conference, one of the virtual conferences out there. And beside the fact that I'm really proud of being part of the Codecamp, I think this is an awesome opportunity for all of us to get in touch and to learn more things in this crazy time. So for this session, what I've prepared for all of you is describing the journey that I've been going through in the last 2 years or so, where I try to find a good solution for developing a client side together with a backend side, together with all the fancy stuff like Yarn-workspaces, mono-repos, and TypeScript. So let's start by saying a few words about me. We don't have any way around it. I'm a staff engineer at a company called Intuit. Maybe not all of you familiar with this company, but this is a huge company. Really familiar in America, in North America. We have a bunch of products that are selling. We are actually the industry leaders in all the fintech industry in the States. We are now moving to the rest of the world. I'm a front-end lead of a couple of teams in this company located in Israel. I am extremely passionate about JavaScript. In everything that I'm doing, this is the only thing that I love, besides the family and all the other stuff. And what's important, most important from everything is that I never stop seeking for the silver bullet stack, what I call it. Is like the ultimate stack that I can be more efficient, my team can be more efficient, and everyone can develop in a high velocity and everything. This is my email. Feel free to reach out. And so the agenda for this session is actually I created a presentation, and it's not a very long presentation. Mainly 4 parts of this presentation. The first one is describing what is a JavaScript full stack project and how we can leverage them using mono-repos, and later on with TypeScript and Yarn-workspaces, and eventually, and this is the important takeaway of this session, is a live demo. I'm going to demonstrate a real world demonstration of those capabilities. Great, so let's start. What is a full stack JavaScript project? I'm assuming that as a front-end developers, we all know what is JavaScript, of course. But if I will try to sketch out some sort of a diagram of a high-level architecture of a full stack project, so this is how it's going to look like. We have a client applications. Those applications can be mobile, can be desktop. We have our application server /API, because it can be both. Naturally, it's going to be a Node.js because we are living in a JavaScript world. And behind the scene, we have all kinds of downstream services where we have a bunch of other technology, maybe Java, Go, or whatever. We have some connectors to cache and databases and message queues and et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to talk about all of this in this session. Of course, I'm going to focus mainly on the client and server because this is our forte. This is what we are doing on a daily basis. And more specifically in this client server thing is the data, is the communication that runs back and forth between the client side and my backend. And why? Because this is sometimes can be a very tedious process. Why tedious process? Because let's take an example of a normal flow we are all familiar with. So usually our client application sends a request to one of our APIs. In this example, I'm calling for sales. I want to get some sales or something. And then what I'm getting in response is usually a JSON form of a lot of data. And so this is how it looks like. So this is a 95 rows JSON. And I'm pretty sure that you have seen much more complex JSON responses than this. I mean, it can be easily way more nested with way more branches and everything. And as the famous quote say, I always enjoy working with huge and unfamiliar JSON responses coming from the server, which of course said by no one ever. If you find someone that this is what you think, let me know. And why? Mainly because two things. First of all, so I see this property, source offering, and I see some value. So this value is a free text, is something that has a type in the database. How should I treat it? And in this example, subscription status, is it something that's supposed to be null, or maybe it should be excluded if it's not defined, or what's going on? So what can I do? I can go to TypeScript. Now, a word about TypeScript as someone who didn't like TypeScript until, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years ago. If you haven't yet moved to TypeScript, please do. It will change your life. Again, I wasn't a big fan of TypeScript, and these days, I'm not seeing myself working without any TypeScript engagement in that way or another. And why TypeScript? Because we can take from one end our JSON, our form or structure of the responses that we are getting, and create some sort of interface describing this response. Now, this is pretty straightforward for anyone who is working with TypeScript. And I'm not going to talk a lot about TypeScript in this session, but for anyone who is pretty familiar with TypeScript, this is a straightforward thing. I mean, we are creating an interface, and this interface I can create property, and for each property I can describe the type. And if it has some inner type, I can use it like enum or other interfaces. Pretty straightforward and pretty cool. This is a good thing to use anyway. But when using this in this kind of thing, we should ask ourselves a couple of questions, because this is if we are talking about a full stack project, we have the client side and then we have the backend. So obviously we have two entities in this world. So is this interface, or what I call it DTO, data transfer object, should be what? Should be where? So should be part of the client side, should be part of the server side. And so the first question, should it be duplicated among the projects? And we don't like duplications, of course. Or should it be in a shared library? So obviously we're going to get to this direction. We're going to create some sort of a shared or common library where we place all of this, and then we just consume it. But then what about changes and versions whenever I want to add some property? So what can I do? And this is exactly where we are getting into libraries. Okay, we're gonna have some shared or common library, as I said. And in this shared library, an NPM package, of course, we all know it. So this NPM can have all the TypeScript definitions, interfaces, types, etc. It can have all the data model, data transfer objects, and everything else that we are already familiar with. But we don't like it because it's a library and working on two different repositories with a shared library. You know, we need to work locally, and if we want to work locally, we need to do a symbolic link, and we don't like it. And that's where exactly we are facing the mono repos. And in monorepos, I mean, according to the name at least, I'm going to say a few words about monorepos, of course, but according just to the name, we are pretty sure that we can create a full stack folder or a repository, code base, where we're gonna have our client, our server, and our common or shared library. And this is pretty cool because this common library, this shared library, is only going to be used with this client and server. Note, I don't need to publish it, so everyone else is going to use it. I'm going to be the one that is going to use them as the client and the server developer. So what is a monorepo? Obviously, we can do it. Obviously, we can gather some client and server in common under the same place. And that will give us a single repository where we can store all of our code and assets. This is a good thing on its own, again. Why? Because we have a better visibility on the entire project. I mean, we can go back and forth between the client part and the server side and everything. And this can dramatically improve our development efficiency, of course. We don't need to clone all kinds of repositories. We don't need to switch IDEs for that. We don't need to do all kinds of stuff that we are doing when we are working with shared libraries, for example, like with NPM and stuff, or Yarn. And it's commonly used by almost everyone that you already know. Babel using it, React is using, of course, Angular and Google. I'm pretty proud of the fact that they are using monorepos, huge monorepos, by the way. And so in a nutshell, what is monorepos versus polyrepos? So on the left hand, we are seeing polyrepo representations where all of our keys components or parts of our platform has its own repository, has its own code base. And on the right hand, and in the monorepo, we have only single repository code base or GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab or whatever, but it's a Git repository. And then we have a folder for each of the components. So a little bit about the pros and cons. For the polyrepo, of course, we don't need anything to manage this. This is straightforward. We are just cloning the repository. We are working. We are getting a fully separations of concern. This is important, especially in big companies. And we have also clear ownership. What does it mean, clear ownership? For big companies, this is really important. We want to let a specific team or specific mission-based team to own a code base or repository or whatever. And for the monorepos, everything is in one place. This is a huge benefit. You're going to see it in a minute. And why? Because it's very easy to manage dependencies in this way. And we are typically can create a single pull request, a single pull PR for a full stack feature. We can work on the backend, we work on the client, on the shared library, and just create a single pull request for deployment, for example. For the cons, so the polyrepo is, of course, is a scattered environment. This is not comfortable. And it's very difficult to enforce conventions and stuff. It's really hard to make cross repos changes. That means that if we are working on more than one repo, it's going to be a burden for us. For the cons on the monorepos, we have much bigger repositories. We have huge workspaces. This is also can be a drawback. It's a bit of challenging CI/CD, but it's not a rocket science, so we can easily solve everything. And it's actually sort of going to be difficult to create autonomies. So for the ownership part, this is going to be a bit of a problem, but it's working. So going back to our project, let's see our time, perfect. So for our project, we have our client application. And for this example, I'm going to use a single client application. It's going to be a React-based application. You can do, of course, whatever you want. It can be also, the client can be also for mobile. For the backend, we are going to use a JavaScript Node.js, again, because very natural thing to do. And same for the common. It's going to be a JavaScript library or JavaScript project that we are going to consume both from the client and server things from. So I'm taking advantage of this virtual conference. So I'm hoping that all of you are looking at the screen and you are sitting in the front line so you can see everything very good. And that's why I can afford myself actually showing my snippets or screenshots of my IDE. So this is how the IDE is going to look like. I'm calling it a full stack micro platform monorepo, a fancy name, yeah. But what we have here, so we have a folder with a client common server, and we have a top level package JSON. For every project, every client, common server, and others, if we're gonna have, we also have a package JSON for their own. And why? Because each project manages its own dependencies. That also means that we're gonna have multiple package lock JSON. And it can be also very tedious because what we are doing is actually we are making the process of working on a shared library in a slightly better way, where we are just referencing the server, for example, or the client projects to another project in my folder. So I'm using a relative path for that. That's not really what I really want to get to, but it's good enough. The other drawback is that for each project, for all of the dependencies, I'm going to have lots of duplications. So if my client and my server are using the same packages, each of them going to have its own instance of this dependency. And of course, this can also be a big drawback. So what can we do? We can still stay with this structure with the client common server, of course, and we can let Yarn-workspaces get into our picture. So Yarn-workspaces is just a tool to manage our mono-repo. We have others, but for Yarn-workspaces, it's very similar to what we have already. The folder structure is going to change a bit. And why? Because we're going to have a top-level package JSON, of course, and we're going to have also a package JSON for each of the projects, for each of our projects. But take a look at the folder structure. Now we have packages, and why packages you're going to see in a minute. And then inside these packages folder, we have our client common server. So why the packages? Because in our top-level packages file, the package JSON file, we should tell Yarn what exactly are we building here. And so because we want Yarn to manage our dependency, our project, our mono-repo, basically. So we are telling Yarn-workspaces, hey, look, our workspaces are going to be located under packages / because we're gonna let Yarn control everything instead of just writing explicitly the packages. This is a very good convention. So let's move on. We talked about duplications in all of our dependencies. And so what does it mean manage Yarn-workspaces to manage our dependencies? So we do have a package JSON for each of the packages because we need to declare what dependencies we need to use for our project. And for this, for the server, for example, this is how the package JSON is going to look like. I'm going to use a prefix of my project name just to be a better usage later. You're going to see it, but it's a very good practice to use this kind of behaviors. And once I'm doing that for all of my projects, I can actually install another package in my Yarn-workspaces mono-repo as a dependency. Like you see at my full stack, this is my namespace, this is my prefix, /common is going to give me the common, it's going to give me a reference to my common package located here, but Yarn will manage it. This is obviously something that not really meant to a JavaScript full stack project, but also like, for example, Babel, they have, I don't know, 20 or 25 packages. And so there it's more useful. For our case, it's a very good practice. For all the dependencies, take a look, we're going to have a top-level node modules, and this top-level node module is going to have all of the dependencies for everyone. So Yarn will control what exactly dependencies we should use in each of the packages. If we need specific different packages for different projects, we can also do that, but this is the out-of-the-box experience, and this is good for us. Okay, that's good. So we have Yarn-workspaces, and it's going to manage our dependency in our mono-repo. We build our mono-repo client common server, and we obviously, if you remember, we talked about our project. We have a shared library, and we want to integrate or inject JavaScript or TypeScript for that. This is extremely important. So we are taking our Yarn-workspaces folder structure, and we are enhancing it a little bit. And how? We are going to put a top-level tsconfig.base.json file. Now, again, I'm not going very deep into what is TypeScript and how to configure it. It's a very complex thing to do if you are not familiar with TypeScript, but fortunately enough, and also fortunately for you, because you are seeing this session, Eventually, I'm going to share a very good starting point where you get everything out of the box. So stay tuned for that. So we are putting a top level tsconfig.base.json, and for every package, we're going to have a tsconfig.json that is actually going to extend our tsconfig base.json. And why? Because this is how the top level JSON looks like. We have our include, because we are letting TypeScript knows where are all of our sources folders. And this is good. It's a common thing for everyone. And we can do some other stuff related to TypeScript, but mainly we can mention the path in the compiler options. This is for better patterns of resolvement of dependencies inside my project. Now, instead of doing // to get to another project, I can just use my prefixes. I have a namespace at my full stack, which I declared in Yarn-workspaces. I can take advantage of this, and I can just play with it. You will see it in a minute. And for our projects, our common project that we want other projects to consume, those projects are going to extend the tsconfig base JSON, of course, as well. And they also mention, we're going to mention some more things related to TypeScript, for example, the composite and incremental and allow.js that allows TypeScript to understand that this library or this package is going to be referenced by other projects in my workspace. Now, I know it sounds a bit complicated, but bear with me. For other projects, client and server, that we are going to use the common, again, we are extending our tsconfig JSON from the top level. We have some other properties in the compiler options, of course. You can add as many as you'd like. And we are setting the references to be our path to the common, to the shared project. Now, this is the only place where we need to use a relative path, but this is the only place. Great. So once we have everything ready, we can move on. We can, how can we say we get enough talking? Let's see things in action. So what I'm going to show, what I'm going to share with you is my recent work that I developed. So I developed a very good starting point, as I told you. This is the repository. You're gonna get these presentations, of course, and you're gonna get this link. And this link is to my public repository. And for this public repository, I'm using all of the good things that I mentioned, plus some other stuff. Because I'm really a fan of server-side rendering, I'm also using Next. By the way, I know that there is a conference of Next.js, so sorry for them that you are here. And for the client side, we're going to use React, of course, TypeScript. Our common library is going to use the TypeScript as well. And our servers is naturally it's going to be Node.js with Express on top of it, connected to a MongoDB for persistence. So this is the stack that I'm going to show you in my demo. And I'm going to show all of the things that I've just showed you. So before we are going to Q&A, let's stop for that. Dan, Florin, if you have any questions, this is a good time before I'm diving into the live demo, because I'm not looking at the slide or the questions. So if you want to ask something, if there is something to answer, just let me know.
I think we'll keep the questions till the end.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So this is what we have. I've built a sort of a very basic application, basic full stack application. And this full stack application, let's make another arrangement like this. Okay. So this full stack application has exactly what I showed you in the presentation. I hope the font is good enough. Florin, Dan, let me know if we need to increase the font. So we have the packages folder. Inside this packages folder, we have our app, backend, and common / shared library. We have our top level package JSON. We have our top level tsconfig.base.json file. For the common project, we have the package JSON and the tsconfig as exactly I showed you, with the composite and everything. And we have our app and backend projects. Now, this is also built with the Yarn-workspaces, which means we have other benefits like using stuff like Klarna for publishing stuff. It's not part of this session. For the full stack project, it's less meaningful because we are building each of these packages on its own. So for my project, usually I'm going to build and deploy the app and the backend and then deploy them. So each of them are going to be built independently. For the development phase, I do need to create a running instance of 3 of them. So I'm going to run a Yarn in develop mode of my common or shared library. I'm going to have Yarn, again, development mode for my backend and my app. And eventually what I'm going to get is a running server locally that show this part of the task of the application. Okay, this is just the frontend. So let's dive in, let's take a look. Let's start with the backend. So the backend is a normal TypeScript project expressed on top of Node.js, of course. And we have, I'm not going to get into much deeper into Express and stuff like that, but we have our routes, and in our routes we have tasks, because this is what we are querying. We wish to display all the tasks. And then here we have a controller, and in this controller we have 2 functions. Right now I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the get all tasks controller file. And this is related exactly to, let me open it, it got closed. So it's related to a GET request that we are getting, that my server will get. And what I need to do here is just to query my task model, my task collection of Mongo, get everything. I know that I'm not doing any serialization, or sorry for all the security guys. Liran, if you are in the audience, I'm terribly sorry for that. But again, this is the demo purpose, and it will give you some work. So we have the tasks here, and I'm just basically returning this response. This is what I do. I'm not doing any kind of special TypeScript stuff beside the fact that I'm using a TypeScript definition file of Express. How about the time? Perfect. Now let's go back. I'm going to do a lot of back and forth between the client and the server, so try to bear with me. So what we have on the other end, let's take a look at the app. Again, this app is Next.js based application for server-side rendering. It's not very important. So you can definitely do just a normal create React app. And here we have an index page, just a single page in the Next.js terminology. This is where I'm going to create my page itself that is going to be rendered on both client and server. Let's leave the server-side rendering aside. It's not that important. It's a very good place to start. So what I'm looking at here, I have my main component. It's called index, obviously, which I'm expecting to get in the props tasks. And then I'm going to show an H1. And if we don't have anything, I'm going to show an empty list message. And here what I have is my table to show my tasks. That's it, nothing complicated. Now, something related to Next.js, which we don't need to get a lot of details, a lot of attention right now, just for you to know that this function is going to be called on the server side to get a pre-rendered version of my application. Here, what I'm going to do is to call my backend, okay, my backend in my mono-repo world. So this is my URL that is pre-configured before. Yeah. And I'm calling the API /tasks to get all of the tasks. Now, what I'm getting in response, I'm using fetch, of course. I'm getting some sort of a response. I don't know anything about this response. And I'm just assigning, I'm expecting the JSON to be a tasks, which is sort of array, because this is what I'm doing here without any definitions. And then I'm just returning it as a props. That's it. All of this means that eventually when this index is going to be rendered by React, I'm going to get in the props the tasks which I declared here. That's it. So here what I'm getting is props, and inside the props I'm expecting to get tasks, okay? And if I'm reloading the page, this is what I'm getting. I have currently 3 tasks. You can take a look and read. So I talked about many cool things. Now let's see those things in action. So how? Let's start by defining my actually task. Now you can see that the task itself has those properties. And obviously it all starts in my model, in my backend model, where I'm connecting everything to Mongo. So I have this task model. This is a Mongo model with some enhancements of TypeScript enhancement. This is the most important one. So I'm creating an iTask, an interface of the task schema, which extends from two things. First is mongoose.document that I'm getting out of the box, and what I created, which is called iTask. Now, iTask is the definition of task. What is exactly iTask? It's actually an interface, a TypeScript interface without the ID, because I'm already getting the ID from document. And this task schema is actually a reflection of what I'm getting in the iTask. Now, let's take a look at it. By the way, here I'm actually notating my mongoose.model to be from type iTask schema, so everyone that will call this task will know what to expect to get. This is a cool, nice feature of TypeScript. But for our purpose, for our back and forth of the client and the server. So now once I created this iTask and where I'm going to create this iTask, this is the most important thing. You can already imagine that I'm going to create it in my common folder, my shared library. And here I have two folders. I have a model and DTO. We're gonna see the DTO in a second. And here in the model, I have task. And this is my definition of task. iTask interface is an ID, title, description, and status format. Now you can see that the status itself is an enum, and this enum has a new, in progress, and done. This is a complete reflection of what we are writing in Mongoose. Perfect. But now the magic. The magic is that because we are already configured everything to be a mono-repo Yarn-workspaces based project, we have already reference from the client and the server to this common folder, this common project. So, and therefore, we can use actually this iTask. And well, let's start in our backend. So here, instead of just getting these tasks, I can assume that I'm going to get an iTask array. And what is iTask? This is exactly the definition that we have in the common. I have also a very cool systems intelligence that IntelliJ is doing for me. VS Code is doing it as well. Maybe even slightly better. I worked with VS Code. Eventually, I gave up and returned to my favorite, IntelliJ. Sorry for all the VS Code fans. Now here I'm sending a tasks, which is from the iTask array definition. This is perfect. Now, first of all, let's see that everything is working. Okay, yeah, and everything is working. The server was restarting itself. Now, since this is what I'm returning for my backend, I can go back to my frontend and to the very start point of coding to my backend. And now I know that the things that I will get in return is going to be an array, but not just an array. It's going to be an array of tasks. Now, again, this task is exactly the same task that we are getting in the common library, which means we are using in both. Sorry, not like this, of course. This is the definition, something like this. Perfect. Take a look at this magic. I switch between the backend and my client, and I'm declaring a list of tasks using the very same interface. So I will know what to expect because this is what I'm sending, right? So because this task is going to be from this type, I can also set my tasks to be this because this is the response for now. And I'm returning it as a props to my index components. So now I can use some other benefits of TypeScript. I can create a type definition of this index, type props, sorry. So I can create an index props. And here I'm going to expect to get iTask array. Now I need to use it. To use it, I'm going to do this. And now from this moment, React knows that what I'm getting in the props.tasks is from this type. I can also even use my useState notation to do that exactly. So I will even get more explicit definitions. Now, once I'm going over all of my tasks, of course, I can use the iTask again here. Now, again, this iTask is the very same iTask definitions that we have in both client and server. And this is awesome. Let's see that everything is still working. Yes, it's working. I reloaded. It's server-side render, so you don't see the flicking. But now I can also see the auto-completion of my iTask definition. This is on its own, it's a huge benefit. I promise you, as someone who is working on a daily basis with full stack projects, this has basically saved my life, because just consider this response to be something more complex. And let's do that, for example. Let's go back to our server. And instead of just returning the tasks as the payload of the response, let's create something else. Let's create a get all tasks DTO, and it's going to be from the type get all task DTO, which I created. Okay, and again, where I created this DTO, it's in my common folders, my common project under the DTO file. And here I have get all tasks DTO, which has only a single property. And I can use it because now it expects me to send the tasks as part of this DTO. Now, instead of just returning my tasks, I can return my get all task DTO itself. And where do I need to use it on the other side? I can go back again to my client side, see my back and forth of my client server. Now here, I do have a tasks definition of this type, but the response is going to be a bit different. The response is going to be typed. It's going to be strictly typed. Get all typed. For that, I'm doing two things. First of all, I want to have more convenient way of getting responses. So the response is going to be get all tasks DTO, but I'm not going to just call the fetch. I'm going to call what I called a typed fetch for this exact URL. Now, what is typed fetch? Typed fetch is just a wrapper on top of fetch. We can take a look at it. It's not that important, but it's a wrapper, a very convenient wrapper that will let me notate the return value or the TypeScript value type of my return value. So what I'm returning is a promise of a generic type. So therefore, I can call this typed fetch with any type that I would like. And in return, I'm doing the .json file, .json part, and I will get only the data. So now the response is going to be get all tasks DTO. And what do I have in this response? I have tasks. So I can assign my tasks to be exactly this. Let's save it. Let's see that everything is still working. Yeah, it's working. I know it doesn't look like it's working, but it is working. Perfect. I didn't change much, but all I did is just to wrap my task in a DTO. And why? Let's, for example, that here we are going to add, we want to send some more information. Like, for example, the owner of those tasks. Never mind about the logic. Let's put here something hard-coded, my name. Now, IntelliJ is going to warn me about this property which is not exist in my get all tasks DTO. So I'm going to create it. I can go into my get all tasks DTO. I can add an owner from TypeScript, and you can already imagine that this owner can be a very complex other interface, for example. So now I'm sending the owner. If I'm going back to my client side, how we are in times, perfect. So I'm going back to my client side. Here, my get all tasks DTO, it's already been updated because I'm working in a mono-repo, Yarn-workspaces, yada, yada. So here I am also have an option to get the owner. Again, I'm on the client side. Client side, backend. It's becoming transparent, totally 100% transparent for me. Think about the advantages, the huge advantages. So here, let's create another property called owner, and it's going to be from type string, of course. We can initialize it with an empty string, and here I can do this, and then I can even pass it to my component, my React component. So now I'm passing two props, tasks and owner. Now to finish this, I can add the owner property here as well to let this component know that this is what I'm going to expect. And here I can, let's say I'm going to say tasks of props.owner. Now saving this, reload, and my server was restarting, but now I'm getting tasks of Royee. Simple as that. So I added one single DTO. This is huge, at least in my opinion. Okay, perfect. Let's move on. So we are good to go. Now, what about creating new tasks? So I created a small UI components of React just to save some time. A new task panel. It should have it should get a function called onTaskAdded. We're going to get it in a minute, but what I'm getting in response, in return right now, is another piece of UI to create a new task. Now, this task has a title and description, of course. Let's take a look what is going on in this new task panel. Okay, again, this is a React component with TypeScript and everything, which is good for us. We have a UI part. I'm using Next.js style JSX. Not that important as well, but here I have a form, a very basic form of creating those input fields and send them back to the server to add a new task. Just a pure UI, pure React, we can call it. We have to use states to get the task title and task description. Now here in the handle save, already did it. Just to save time, take a look what I'm doing. So I'm building a new task. And again, it's from the iTask definition, iTask interface. And this is the same iTask that I'm using in my backend. And I'm creating a new DTO, which called a create new task DTO. It's going to be exactly in the same place where I'm getting all the task DTO as well. And it has only task, which is from iTask interface type. And I'm setting this task to be the new task. I'm calling my type fetch, sorry, with this generic type. It's not generic, it's my type, create new task DTO, which means that this is what I'm going to get in return. Now, my body itself is going to be a JSON string file, because this is how fetch works, of my create new task DTO. That's it. Now I'm sending it back to the client. Before we are, sorry, for the server. Now, before moving to the server, let's take a look for a second, what is this onTaskAdded? So my response.task is something that I want to show to the user immediately. I don't want the user to reload everything. So I'm expecting the user to give me an onTaskAdded when this process is completed. And this is async process. And once it's added, I'm telling my parent that a new task has been added. So let's implement this. And here, I already know that I'm getting an iTask definition here. So here, what I can do is set. I need to add here set tasks, React use state thing. And here I can call set tasks. I can destructure my tasks plus the task that I just added. Okay, perfect. Before doing it, before trying it, we don't have much time. Let's take a look at the backend part. Now, the backend part is going to be exactly the same magic. So let's take a look at the controller of the create new task. Again, it's going to respond the post request coming into my server backend. Create new task now is going to look like this. I'm expecting the body to be the create new task DTO. This is actually amazing because it's the exact same interface that I worked on my client side. And inside, as part of this DTO, again, I'm not doing validations. Again, sorry, Liran, for the not serializing everything, yada, yada. We don't have time for that now, although it's important. I'm not disrespecting, of course. So we have task. And here, I'm just creating a new task in my model. And I'm creating a new DTO because it's the very same DTO, and I'm sending back my newly created task to my client. And that's it. Now, if everything is working, I can add here new title and here new description, hit the save and get a new task added. Now, this is actually amazing because if you hadn't noticed, I went back and forth between my client and my server, and it was completely transparent. I used the same objects, same interfaces, same everything. Now, just think about a very complex DTO that I will send here, and I can put immediately my hands on the type of this response on my backend, on my client. So this is a huge benefit. And I think that we are gone. We're already behind time, and we didn't have. I didn't had much time of Q&A, but I really want to do it. So finish with the demo, the live demo. Let's go back to our presentation. Oh, sorry, not send. And again, in my slides, you're gonna get this repository, which has a very good starting point of it. Started doing exactly what I did. Everything is already configured for you. That's it.
Hello, Royee. I was in the backstage at the beginning of your presentation, but I've heard it all. So
let's test him. Ask him a question, right?
Yeah, let's get some questions. Yes.
I was curious about, you started the presentation by saying you're looking for that silver bullet stack. All right, and yeah, I totally relate to this. How close are you to having that?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure that I got into my best place so far with this stack. It has a little bit drawbacks. Like, for example, if I want to use some other stuff than Next.js, I'm going to have a bit complications. If I want to use less, for example, the new Create React app, the latest one that happens. So the latest Create React app boilerplate does not contain any logic that supports mono-repos, for example. And it's relatively new, yeah, but I'm sure we're gonna have some solution for that. But I'm currently, for my full stack world, I think I'm got into my silver bullet stack. I mean, as you see, if you saw what I just showed, it seems like I'm there. It seems like I'm working in like my best efficiency, most efficiency in both client and server. Extremely good.
That's cool. And speaking of mono-repo, there's another thing. Of course, there are clear advantages for mono-repos, and that's why it appeared and helps you manage dependencies, reduce the overhead. But are there also drawbacks? Are there situations where you would create a separate repo?
So far, I haven't had a chance to create a new new repo for that. I'm working in parallel on multiple services for the backend, and my client is totally complicated one, and everything is working extremely smoothly. I know it sounds a bit good to be true, but this is the truth. I mean, maybe I will have some situation where I will need to create a new repo for something else. There are some cases where I can think of like adding some caching mechanism or stuff like that I want to be aside, totally separated. So I guess that for this kind of things, it's going to be a new repo. Yes.
And for instance, let me ask it differently. If I know there's a team or organization that's currently or wants to move into this approach, so they're using the multi-repo approach at the moment. What would be the journey, or what things would need to change in the way they approach things? I don't know, maybe the way they do branching or.
Okay, so this is exactly what I did. I also did it at work. So we had multiple projects, client and server, and we obviously had some common functionalities where we used as a common package, as a common NPM package with all this symbolic link and everything. And so once I moved to mono-repo, just for that purpose, for the full stack purpose, it went blown-minded. Because all we had to do is just to put everything inside the same folder structure. according to the folder structure that I just showed, add some TypeScript definitions and stuff like that, which I already did in this repository that I'm sharing here. And that's it. Everything's supposed to work immediately. By the way, this is also can be enhanced in so many other ways. This is only a basic, very basic thing. So for your question, not a lot to do.
So it's pretty smooth. Cool.
Okay.
Florian.
Yeah, Royee, you're leading a team, at least a team at Intuit, right?
Yes.
Did they embrace your full stack proposition?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because at Intuit it's a bit more difficult. Not because they don't want it, but because we have our own ecosystem, like I'm showing on the breaking the web monolith, all the previous presentation that I did. We already have some others. We already have other stack that we are working with for building web applications, but we do have some other teams. Like for example, we started 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, we started a Next.js project in Intuit. Currently is in production. So things are getting better. I mean, we are getting closer to the silver bullet stack. And I know already from a friend of mine that is working very close to me that he wishes to get his project and convert it into a mono-repo project. So things happen for this kind of step. For this kind of companies, for sure, it's huge companies, but it's
right.
You know, it's making a lot of interest all over the place.
All right, Royee. Well, thank you very much. It's been a total pleasure having you here again.
Thank you.
And, yeah, even if we lost count of the Codecamps we've been to together, let's keep it coming.
Yeah, and let's make a +1 in person next year.
I'm counting on that. Yeah, looking forward, guys, to meet you all. And for everyone, thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, and see you guys.